Welcome to Village Church Connections. I'm David Pavey. A former colleague wrote to me some time ago. She wrote concerning the bitterness that had crept into her family. She wrote, and this is a quote, "My maternal grandmother died February 7th. It was a tough beginning of the year. Grandma was one of those very capable women who amazed me with her ability to persevere through difficulties. We talked about faith a number of times, and she told me that she knew that she could not survive life without God's help. Hopefully she heard, understood, and believed the good news. Anyway, my aunt has refused to help my grandma in the past 5 years or so. They had a falling out and had refused to speak with each other since then. As my grandmother's health had been declining, I started reaching out to my aunt to see if she was willing to get involved. She kept refusing. Finally, I called her last summer after my grandmother was hospitalized, and I told my aunt that even if she didn't help with her care, she needed to seriously consider reconciling with her mother, as it would be a source of deep regret when her mom finally died. My aunt cried on the phone, but she said she couldn't reconcile as it was just too hard. When my grandmother died, we called my aunt to let her know, but she didn't want to come to the service, not even the service for her own mother. It's been so sad to deal not only with my grandmother's death, but also with the serious brokenness that exists in our family. I've been trying to pray on a regular basis for my aunt, that her heart would become soft. She's had and continues to have choices placed before her, and infusions of grace given to her, which could lead to change. So I'm trying to trust God for her life." End quote. What a sad situation my colleague described. A broken family, because bitterness was allowed to take root and never dealt with. This leads me to a Bible story about bitterness. It all began innocently enough. Two groups of enemy soldiers met at the pool of Gibeon in Israel. One group was with Abner, a cousin to King Saul and commander-in-chief of his army. The other group served under Joab, cousin to King David, and commander of his army. It was almost a pastoral setting. But then the trouble began. Abner suggested some entertainment. A limited number from each party could fight hand to hand, like a boxing match. But suddenly the conflict grew out of control. Men began to die as an all-out battle developed. All too late, Abner screamed to Joab, "Stop! Time out! Don't you realize this will end in bitterness?" And it did end in bitterness. They called a truce, counted the 380 dead, and finally separated. But then Joab used the first opportunity he could to find and to assassinate Abner. He stabbed him to death. It was bitterness gone wild. You can read about it all in 2 Samuel chapter 2 in the Bible. Too bad that Abner hadn't seen the end from the beginning and not suggested a friendly fight to entertain the troops. Each cause has its effect, and conflict often leads to bitterness. Sometimes the bitterness comes slowly, like a cancer. Sometimes swiftly, like a cannonball. But one way or the other it comes, and it needs to be resolved. Some men and women in our entourage today are consumed with bitterness. They can't let go of past conflicts and forgive. They eat bitterness for breakfast, lunch, and supper. It's always with them, lurking just beneath the surface. Wherever they go, they carry their grudge. If only these bitter souls had read Samuel early in the game. If only they had meditated on Abner's perceptive, though all too late warning. This will end in bitterness. Then they could have nipped the conflict in the bud and saved themselves a bitter harvest. So search your heart today. Is there a seed of bitterness? Will you crush it or cultivate it? Crush it while you can. If you don't, it may grow to crush you. Thank you for tuning in once again to Village Church Connections.